And it looks like we are live. Hello, everyone. This is My Two Cents. Welcome back to my channel. There is a lot going on in the world right now, and I was thinking a lot this week about what exactly I wanted to talk about. Now, this is a topic that we have discussed on my channel before, particularly when the COVID-19 outbreak first happened. We talked a lot about this, and that is, the collapse of the US dollar. We know it's coming. When exactly is it going to happen? Well, in light of recent events, I do want to talk about it again, especially in particular, I want to give a shout out to Mike Maloney of goldandsilver.com. I've recommended this video series many times, but back in 2013, he made a series of videos called Hidden Secrets of Money that explain very well the differences between money and currency, the history of money, and how the history of money and the history of economics and really of world powers shows an inevitable progression that happens in every nation when governments try to manipulate currency in order to expand and increase their power over the people. And his second episode in particular, the 7 stages of empire, was extremely prophetic then, but it's even more prophetic now considering what's going on as the COVID-19 crisis is allegedly coming to an end here with the rise of President Biden, the hero of the people. And I want to take a look at this just because it rings even truer. It was true in August of 2013 when Mike Maloney released this, and it's looking even truer and truer now. But basically, what Mike does in this 30-minute video is he goes historically through pretty much every empire that has existed, starting with the Greek city-state of Athens, the Roman Empire, so on and so forth, and basically shows that every empire in history, there are 7 stages that basically play out in the history of the empire, and they are this. So stage number 1, a country begins its, as a new country comes into existence, it starts out with sound money. Basically either gold, it actually uses gold and silver coins, or it has a currency that is backed by gold and silver with a 100% ratio. Stage number 2, as the country develops economically and socially, the government begins to build out infrastructure, adding layer upon layer of public works. Stage number 3, massive military. As national economic affluence grows, so does a government's political influence and aspiration, and it increases expenditures to fund a massive military. As we've said before, politics is violence. In order for a government to truly have power, it must be backed at the barrel of a gun. So if a government is to grow its power, it must grow its military. Stage number 4, perpetual war. Eventually, it puts its military to use and its expenditures explode. Stage number 5, debasing of the currency supply. To fund the war, the government steals its wealth of the people by debasing their coinage with base metals or by replacing their money with a currency that can be created in unlimited quantities. Think back to the days of the Roman Empire before paper money. They debased their gold and silver coins by mixing it with copper and other metals that are more plentiful, or in today's day and age, the severing of the US dollar to gold and making it a purely fiat currency. Stage number 6. The loss of faith in purchasing power of the expanded currency supply is sensed by the populace and by the financial markets, triggering a loss of faith in the currency. And this, I would say, is where we're at with the United States right now. And then stage number 7, and this is what is coming. A mass exodus out of the failing currency and into precious metals or other tangible assets takes place. The currency collapses and gold and silver rise sharply in price, and their finite supply is relentlessly bid higher by the huge quantity of currency that was created. And he says here at the end, important. This process transfers massive wealth to those who had the wisdom to position themselves beforehand in real money, gold, and silver. Now, we're going to keep looking through the article, but before we do, I want a quick look at some other articles that have been published within the past couple of days. In particular, the January jobs report. Now, this is coming from the Communist News Network, but even they admit, so the U.S. economy, if you'll recall, last month we talked about how in December, for the first time since March, the U.S. economy actually had a net loss in jobs. More people lost jobs than jobs were gained. Now, what they're saying is that in January, 49,000 jobs were added, but that was certainly not the levels that you should be looking at if we're considering economic recovery. And the unemployment rate fell only 0.4%. And here we got a graph that they've displayed from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is March of 2020, right when the COVID-19 pandemic is taking off. You see jobs completely fall down. But we also see the mass shutdown of the economy. This is all blamed on the fact they're saying doesn't have anything to do. The economy was strong. This is only because of COVID-19 and everything being shut down. As soon as we open up, everything is going to get better again. Well, you see jobs start to steadily rise again, but they're leveling off and they're looking like they're going to drop again, despite the fact that the stock market is doing exceptionally, exceptionally well, which doesn't make any sense considering when the economy is doing well, not only should stocks be high, employment should be high, because presumably stocks are high because companies are doing very well. They're creating products and jobs are being filled to create those products, and people are buying those products. But no, companies are doing poorly. Jobs growth is doing poorly, yet the stock market is doing immensely well. That tells you something's fishy. One more quickly before we move back to the Mike Maloney article. And that is Biden's stimulus bill here. So Biden faces the $1.9 trillion question. Is it too much? Again, this is coming from CNN, not a news institution I trust quite a bit. But it's interesting that even they are willing to ask the question, is Biden's $1.9 trillion question too much? Reason being, of course, among the political elites, among the economists, even now, despite the state of emergency we're in, there are those with enough sense working in the government to start asking the question, can the government just continue spending borrowed money and spend its way into prosperity? That's the question we're going to ask next. But let's get back to Mike Maloney's article for a second. So let's look at U.S. history specifically. So stage one, sound money. For over 100 years, the United States had sound money with a 100% reserve ratio. For example, a $20 in paper was fully convertible to a $20 gold coin. But then in 1913, the gold exchange standard established a 40% reserve ratio, which means that $50 in cash equaled $20 in gold. Rock solid, definitively valued currency was suddenly devalued by more than half. And of course, 1913, anyone who knows their history knows that's the year that the Federal Reserve System was itself created, and that spelled the death of the US dollar. Stage two, public works program. In 1933, the newly elected President Roosevelt, in the name of fighting the Great Depression, initiated massive public works programs. To fund them, he created currency inflation by raising the government-determined dollar price for gold from $20.67 per ounce to $35 per ounce. Then he went even further, ending the convertibility of paper currency for gold, then outlawing the private ownership of gold altogether. Gold certificates were no longer printed, although convertible silver certificates persisted till the 60s. Roosevelt, for all practical purposes, turned America into a welfare state, where ever-increasing amounts of tax money are raised and spent on the public good, a state of affairs that has persisted to the present day. And I mean, I would argue it was happening even before Roosevelt, but Roosevelt definitely is you can see a turning point in U.S. history where prior to people like Woodrow Wilson and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, there was a more widespread understanding that it is the responsibility of the individual to provide for himself, not the government to bail him out. Abraham Lincoln's famous quote, which even he didn't follow, but the quote, "Government should only do for man what man cannot do better for himself." When people like FDR come around, you can see a massive shift in the public understanding of the proper role of government, rather than just to do the minimal aspects of government that most people agree on: the night watchman state, police, military, courts. Government should be taking money from the people and using it to make the world better. Stage three, the Bretton Woods system. In 1941, the U.S. economy was driven by war, which was financed by inflated American dollars that were spent abroad and brought a vast store of gold back into the country. Remember, war can be good for the economy if it's not being fought on your soil. And of course, the point there is war is good for a country's economy if the country itself isn't involved. War cannot improve economics itself. Destruction does not create prosperity. War, like any other forceful transaction, can only benefit some at the expense of others. In particular, it benefits the state and the state's politically connected cronies while harming the populace as a whole. But by the end of the war, the United States owned 2/3 of the world's gold, and Europe was flooded with paper money. This led to a collaboration of world leaders who met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to devise a new world monetary standard. Henceforth, the U.S. dollar would reign supreme as the world currency. There was no gold reserve ratio, and Americans were still banned from owning the metal. However, because the U.S.'s massive gold reserves and a trade surplus heavily in the U.S.'s favor, foreigners could still redeem the dollars stored in their vaults for gold if they ever wanted to. Stage four, never-ending war. After World War II, the U.S. was the only remaining industrial power that hadn't been decimated by conflict. One might have supposed that the rebuilding process meant the end of the war, at least for a while. It didn't. In fact, the U.S. was immediately transformed into a military-industrial state where war was essentially perpetual. The Korean War, the Cold War, the Vietnam War, of course, moving on, we'll see the Iraq War, the War of Afghanistan, both of which are still going on, up to the cost of either fighting foreign wars or maintaining constant domestic war readiness. Such immense ongoing costs could only be financed through deficit spending, which is another term for inflation. Other countries noticed. By 1971, the dollar standard created at Bretton Woods was falling apart. The U.S. was less and less able to supply the gold needed to back its inflated dollar and foreign trade. In fact, by this point, the U.S. had lost 50% of its gold reserves as nations started redeeming their dollars for gold, realizing that the U.S. couldn't make good on its promises. Which, of course, reaches stage 5, eternal inflation. In 1971, President Richard Nixon, who everyone knows for his scandal involving Watergate, but really the real scandal he ought to be known for is the fact that he permanently closed the gold window. And in August of 1971, Nixon temporarily suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Of course, we know nothing's more permanent than a temporary government program. And from that point on, there was no longer any formal tie between the U.S. dollar and gold. The fixed rate of $35 per ounce that foreign countries could redeem was no longer in place. And of course, if you think 1971, $35 an ounce, what's gold going for now? Yeah, like $1,200, $1,400. And we know it's only going to go up since then. And that is at that time that Secretary of State Henry Kissinger made a deal with Saudi Arabia that became to be known as the petrodollar system, that essentially moved the backing of the U.S. dollar from gold to oil, in as much as Saudi Arabia agreed they would only sell oil in U.S. dollars, and they would convince forcefully all other OPEC nations to do the same. And that's, of course, what the Iraq War was fought over. And what we can see now happening, though, is that the petrodollar system is fading. So stage number 6. And bear in mind, it's 2021. Mike Maloney wrote this in 2013. In recent years, the U.S. federal debt has rocketed to over $20 trillion. Again, this is written in 2013. Today, it's fastly approaching $30 trillion. So in the past 7 years, the national debt's increased by more than 1/3 than it was in 2013. Growth rates like never been seen before in history. And currency inflation has proceeded apace. The petrodollar system has held to this point, but especially in light of China's emergence as the largest global importer of oil and their recent launch of a yuan-based oil trading exchange that seeks to shift the currency in which the world trades crude, the petrodollar's days seem to be numbered. And indeed they are. Foreign countries have become increasingly nervous about the value of the dollars they've amassed because of the U.S.'s trade deficit, which has been in the tens of billions per year since 2020, potentially paving the way for gold-backed oil trades in the future. And bear in mind, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi of Libya tried to do that under the Obama administration, and of course he was very quickly taken out by the U.S. military. And Saddam Hussein tried to start trading oil and euros, after which point the U.S. promptly invaded Iraq and toppled Saddam's regime. History teaches that when governments inflate their currencies past a certain point, the confidence of the people and of the markets evaporates. With a highly enmeshed world trade system, any cracking of the dollar's dominance is going to have dire consequences, not only for Americans, but for citizens and nations spanning the globe. Default on the U.S. debt, followed by a deflation and a major economic depression, is one possibility. The Federal Reserve, still mindful of the 1930s, fears that outcome more than anything, but the other alternative, hyperinflation, could be even worse. At some point, however, we have to pick our poison. And that brings us to stage 7, which is tomorrow. So, again, that article was written in 2013. It is now 2021. And the one thing I want everyone to bear in mind is that, and we've talked about this a lot recently, but the Fed has been, ever since 2013, keep in mind, like the national debt was 20 trillion. Now in 2021, it is a certainty it's going to hit 30 trillion. And how is the government funding it? It's basically monetizing debt. Whenever the U.S. Treasury needs more money, it can sell treasury bonds, treasury bills, these debt instruments in order to fund itself, with the promise that it will pay back to those that loan to it more money in the future in terms of interest. And that only works so long as private investors like foreign nations and individuals and corporations actually believe that the return they're going to get on the US dollar is going to leave them better off than they were beforehand. But especially since with the amount of inflation that's taking place, we can see that the world is getting wise. There is fewer and fewer foreign countries are willing to invest in U.S. Treasuries. Fewer and fewer private investors are willing to invest in U.S. Treasuries, which essentially means that with Biden's $1.9 trillion relief and all the more relief that's coming, talk of a $15 minimum wage, universal basic income, Biden possibly revitalizing wars in the Middle East, the government is going to have to fund itself somehow. And its only way to do that is to monetize the debt, which means essentially instead of selling debt instruments directly to private investors, it's going to end up selling them directly to the Federal Reserve, which will buy it with money printed out of nothing, which is just adding an extra step. It's no more than the government funding itself by printing more money. And at this point, historically, this is usually when confidence in the currency is lost. People stop believing that the money is that the money is valuable. They realize if they hold on to their currency for any length of time, it's going to lose its purchasing power, and they start selling rapidly, trying to hang on to any material asset, so long for any price they can get to them. They know it'll hold its value more than the currency. Of course, the only thing, historically, we know the one thing that can stop this is global uncertainty. And I use I've talked about it before, but the historical example of the Weimar Republic in Germany, where during World War I, the German government increased the currency supply by 400%, yet there was no corresponding increase in inflation. The reason being, World War I was a time of uncertainty, and people in that uncertainty saved as much as they can. Well, in the modern age, we have, with government creating all this money, what do we have? We have the crisis of COVID-19. It's a time of uncertainty, and people at large are not buying new houses. They're not building new houses. They're not taking vacations. They're not investing in development of new products or anything else you would be doing in times when economic times are good. The reason being, because it's a time of uncertainty, and in times of uncertainty, people tend to save more than anything else. Which is, again, why I say it's extremely suspicious that the stock market is doing so well right now, yet jobs are going down, and businesses are not investing in new products. Tourism is practically dead. All the market signs of a thriving economy from a perspective of selling goods and services are not there yet. Yet the economy is doing very, very good. Well, no, excuse me, not the economy. The stock market is doing very, very good. And the reason I wanted to talk about this week is because earlier this week, I saw a video that was being shared on, I didn't see it on TikTok because I don't use TikTok, but it was a TikTok video that ended up getting shared on Twitter, where it had a couple that were answering, a couple who are apparently famous TikTok stars. They were asked the question, how do you make money? And they said, well, we actually make our money by trading on Robinhood. And they made clear this wasn't a promotional for Robinhood, but they said, basically, the husband explains, he's like, I got this app called Robinhood. I just look and I see when a stock is going up, I buy it. And then as soon as it starts to go down, I sell it. And that way we're able to make enough money trading stocks, and we have way more time to do the things we want with our lives. And of course, that sounds great and all. If you could just make money making a few clicks on your Robinhood app every day, why would you do and then have all the time left to do whatever you wanted with your time rather than work some dead-end job that you hate? Why wouldn't you do it? And of course, in the comments section, everyone was praising them. Thank you for teaching this to me. I think I'm going to try trading stocks because I want to have time to do to do what I want with my time as well. But if you stop and think about this for a minute, stocks, of course, represent ownership in a company. In a regular free market, with no government interference, presumably stocks go up because corporations are producing products that people want and need, which increases the value of that corporation, which means more people want to own that corporation. The only reason stocks are going up right now is because people are buying stocks despite the fact that the companies are not doing well. Where's that money coming from? It's coming from the stimulus payments that the government is sending out. It's coming from all the money that is being created to fund the government's efforts because consumer prices of goods and services are not rocketing sky high, but stock prices are. That shows the only reason the prices are going up is because people are buying stocks despite the fact that the companies aren't doing anything that ought to indicate to you that you ought to buy stock. Now, if everyone does what this couple is doing, says, I'm going to quit my job and go try to make money selling stocks, just think this through. If everybody quits their job at the grocery store, at McDonald's, at the farm, at whatever they're doing, whatever it is they do, and starts trading stocks, well, where are the goods and services that everyone wants to buy with the money they're making trading their stocks? And the answer is they're not there. the goods and services that people actually want to buy with the money they're making have to be produced by someone. And if no one is producing goods and services, then inevitably the only thing that can happen is what goods and services are left, the prices rise. As more and more people leave regular jobs to try to make money trading in a stock market that looks like stocks keep going up, sooner or later, and I would say the point that this is going to happen is when the crisis is finally determined, finally declared over. Who knows when that's going to be? The government presumably is going to try to keep this crisis going as long as they can, but they can't keep it going forever. Eventually, at some point, people are going to try to cash in on all the money they've made in the stock market and start buying the goods and services that they want. When that happens, prices will shoot to the moon. Everyone's going to realize what's happening. They will sell frantically, and all those assets that everyone thought was worth a ton of money are going to will become worthless, and that is the point that the economy will crash. Now, as Mike Maloney pointed out at the end there, those that are at this point, there inevitably is a mass exodus out of gold and silver, out of the currency and into actual goods and services and assets that have value, in particular, gold and silver. Now, I think cryptocurrencies do have promise, but even then, not every cryptocurrency is going to succeed. And I would say the massive spike that's taken place in the price of Bitcoin, a good sign for Bitcoin, is more so that more and more people are trying to make money off Bitcoin, not actually use it to trade goods and services as opposed to the US dollar, which means that even though Bitcoin is doing very well right now, and I think Bitcoin and other cryptos have the potential to replace the dollar as the primary means of exchange in the future, I wouldn't count on it staying at the super high prices it's going to be when it ultimately stabilizes, or if it crashes. I don't think it's going to, but that certainly is a possibility as well. However, gold and silver, the same gold and silver they were trading in ancient Egypt still has value today. So those that have been smart enough up to this point to invest in gold and silver, in actually owning real estate and actually owning the goods and services, non-perishable goods and services that people are going to want, they are going to win. Now, I don't know how long this is going to be. I don't presume to predict. Mike Maloney wrote this in 2013. The major crash hasn't happened yet, but what has happened is the government has made the problem worse, and the longer the government successfully holds off the crash, the actual worse it's going to be when the bubble finally pops. So if you have right now lots of cash in your savings account, saving it for a rainy day, just know that cash is not going to save you. It will lose its value. You're much better off investing in tangible assets like gold and silver, cryptocurrencies. So long as they're properly diversified, I wouldn't put everything you have into cryptocurrencies, property, everything else, because let's face it, this is getting bad. The government has staved it off till this point, and they might stave it off longer. Maybe they'll stave it off into 2022. Maybe they'll stave it off into 2025. But the one thing we can guarantee is the longer they successfully stave off this collapse, the worse it is going to be when it finally happens. So I'm not seeing a lot of comments that I particularly want to address. Thank you, everyone, for being here. But Night Shift, hello, hey, my 2 cents. And Jeff says, don't forget to smash that like button. Absolutely. Please go ahead, like, share, subscribe, leave your comments. I will go ahead and post the link to Mike Maloney's article on my blog as soon as I'm done with this. And as always, that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth.